I've listened to hundreds of near-death experiences over the course of the last couple of years. Most of those were interviews on YouTube, though there are a few books that I read after seeing an interview, and I wanted to kind of get the full expanded version of the story. So I've definitely taken an interest in those experiences. I think they're a piece of the puzzle, and it would certainly be a mistake to dismiss them and just relegate them to the realm of, hallucination. I don't think that's what's going on. That said, I'm not entirely sure what to make of them. However, the thing that I find the most compelling about near-death experiences isn't simply that there are clear commonalities between experiences. People often experience, very similar realms that they enter into. What I find the most compelling is something that's a little bit more subtle about these experiences, and it's the aspect of the experiences that people report that is unexpected and very different than our normative conscious experience. For example, time and again, I have heard an experiencer describe how in this disembodied state, they experienced 360-degree perception, which, that's very different than what we experience normally. I've never experienced anything like that. And even in my dreams, right, we would think that in our dreams, anything would be possible if our dreams are just a product of our imagination. But even in our dreams, I have never experienced anything so kind of radically different than what I normally experience. But I've heard so many different experiencers report that, how they experience this kind of 360-degree capacity to see. I find that unexpected. I find that something that would be very hard to imagine. I've also heard experiencers time and again describe the idea of a life review. And in this life review, they relive the entirety of their life or key moments of it, but not only from their own perspective, also from the perspective of everyone else involved. So if you interacted with someone and had a negative effect on someone, you experience that, you feel that as if you were that person. That too is very unexpected and very different than our normative conscious experience. And it's not something that can be easily imagined. Again, in my dreams, which are, supposedly mere hallucinations of my imagination, I've never experienced anything like that. There's also, this trope of experiencers explaining some sort of timeless state. So in this disembodied form, on the quote-unquote other side, time operates very differently, so that multiple things are all happening simultaneously, and yet still you're able to keep track of these different events. They'll explain this in different ways. Some people will say it was timeless. Some people will just say that time worked differently there. But again, that's very different than our normal experience. And if NDEs were simply the hallucination of a damaged brain, you would think that the experience would be more akin to like a dream, where we're basically just taking the experience of our life and projecting it forward in some way. But that doesn't seem to be what's taking place. You also hear time and again about how on the other side, communication occurs telepathically. These experiencers report having these telepathic communications with these other beings, these other entities. And again, that's very different than what we experience in this life. Why would someone imagine that? In my dreams, I've never imagined telepathically communicating with anyone. They'll also describe an expanded state of consciousness where they're able to basically think multiple lines of thought simultaneously without any difficulty. Their awareness expands way beyond what we could possibly comprehend in our current state. So I find these subtle aspects of near-death experiences to be very interesting and very compelling, because they're not what you would expect if NDEs were simply a hallucination. There's something that's very difficult for us to imagine in our current state. And yet, these aren't one-offs. These are themes that I have heard repeated almost verbatim in dozens and dozens and dozens of near-death experiences. So for me, that is the aspect of NDEs that I find the most compelling, and suggests that there is some sort of objective reality behind these experiences.